Hi there, welcome back to this week's edition of Get Me Right, your weekly shot of deep dive on matters consequential. Issues you missed during the weekly grind but would want to know more about. This week, two topics like I always do. One, a political debate which began in the parliament and then went all the way to Bengal and had echoes coming in from Assam and Jharkhand and even Bengaluru. That of some demographic changes taking place in pockets across the country which show a pattern. I'll explain to you the pattern and you decide whether it is something you should be concerned about. Second, on the foreign front, we could have picked up Israel's elimination of the Hamas top leadership, but maybe I'll come to it sometime later. If Israel wants to be on the right side of history, it should end the Gaza war now. But this week, my focus is on Quad, the grouping between India, the United States, Australia, and Japan. The foreign ministers met this week in Tokyo, and it took its sharpest position yet on China, mincing no words on Chinese belligerence and military aggression in its immediate neighborhood. I'll explain the reasons behind increasing stiffness in the world community about China's expansionism in breach of international rule of law, and how it affects India, both good and bad. Let's begin. During the ongoing session of Parliament, BJP MP Nishikant Dubey raised a row with his intervention during general discussion on union budget on July 25. Dubey is Lok Sabha member from Godda constituency of Jharkhand. Let's listen to him to understand what's the controversy and then separate the grain from the chaff.
भारत सरकार से ये आग्रह है कि ये राज्य सरकार बांग्लादेशियों को बसाने के लिए आदिवासियों का सत्यानाश कर रही है और इसके लिए वहां राष्ट्रपति शासन लगाई.
Two points come out of Dubey's comments. One, that a demographic change is happening in pockets of eastern India from Bihar to Jharkhand to Bengal, that the demographic change is turning the national majority of Hindu community into a minority in those pockets. He also thought that the reason behind this change is illegal infiltration from Bangladesh. Two, Dubey thought that the affected region, and he named the districts, Santhal Pargana in Jharkhand, made up of districts of Godda, Deoghar, Pakur, Dumka, Jamtara and Sahibganj, Katihar, Kishanganj and Araria in Bihar, Murshidabad and Malda in Bengal. A total of 11 districts be carved into a union territory. If wishes were horses and Nishikant Dubey was granted one, it would turn out to be a union territory with a Hindu minority. But Dubey got panned by opposition for being divisive, for conjuring up a Muslim majority union territory. And even the BJP distanced itself from him, calling his comments private opinion and not that of the party. There's an election ahead in Jharkhand, and the BJP cannot afford to antagonize the state's sentiment by suggesting any bifurcation.
When Parliament is in process, he is making his own statement to divide the Bengal.
मोदी है तो मुमकिन है का चल रहा है, वो जो जी चाहे बोल रहा है, बोलने दीजिए, लेकिन यूनिटी ऑफ बंगाल को वो कभी टाल नहीं सकेंगे.
Before Dubey, some other BJP leaders have also spoken on the same subject of demographic change in the last fortnight. From Bengal BJP President Sukanto Majumdar to Assam Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma and Union Minister Giriraj Singh. Those comments have fallen into a pattern which can qualify as larger Islamophobia that the BJP is accused of following. And frankly, some of it might be true also.
ये मेरे लिए बहुत बड़ा मुद्दा है, इसलिए मैं असम में, बंगाल में हर दिन मेरा असम में मुस्लिम पॉपुलेशन 40% हो चुका है.
But going beyond BJP politics, my focus is on bringing to you a pattern, as I promised, based on India's census figures over the last century and more. These numbers are secular as they are maintained by governments of all persuasion over a century, from the British to the communist-dominated United Front, and of course the Congress for greater part since independence. For some graphics, I have depended on the work of Chennai-based Center for Policy Studies, whose director J.K. Bajaj allowed his data mining to be used for this show. First census in India happened in 1881. Since then, the decadal exercise has happened 14 times, the last being in 2011. The data helps create simple graphs and patterns which speak for themselves. While the BJP leaders might want a half-hearted debate on demographic change in the country, the issue has been building up over decades. Infiltration has been a historical factor in states like Assam and Bengal, and is increasingly impacting population composition in pockets of Bihar, Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh, even Delhi. The reason why we are focusing on this is because there are deniers, people who say nothing like that is happening. They marshal numbers like fertility rates and development economics parameters like income disparities to prove that there's nothing unusual about the demographics. It's a sensitive issue, and I would analyze the politics behind it, but without passing any value judgment, let's put across the numbers as they are first. A quick run using graphics. For reasons of simplicity, I have clubbed Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, and Buddhism into one unit of Indic faiths or religions that originated in India and have more commonalities vis-a-vis the Abrahamic faiths that traveled to India through the flux of history over millennia. Here we go. In this graphics, if you consider India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh as one unit, in the sense that if you consider pre-partition India as a whole, the population of Indic faiths, which was roughly 80% in 1881, stood at 67% by 2011 census figures. Projecting the trend to 2024 could result in a number close to 65%, which means Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, and Buddhists, who were 80% of the subcontinental population in 1881, are now down to 65%. The Muslim population of the subcontinent, on the other hand, has increased from about 20% in 1881 to 31% in 2011 and could be closer to 32-33% now. Christians too have grown to more than double their numbers over this period of 130 years. Now let's look at the post-1947 reality. The first census post-independence happened in 1951, which takes into account partition-related mass migrations. So that's our cutoff. In Pakistan, the population of Hindus, which was roughly 20% before partition, reduced drastically to 1.5% due to migration in 1947. Since then, it has remained steady at below 2%, barely accounting for replacement fertility rates. In Bangladesh, Indic faiths accounted for about 30% of the population in territories that became East Pakistan post-independence. In 2011 census, the number stood at less than 10%, which means Hindu population in what was East Pakistan earlier and Bangladesh post-1971 has reduced steadily from 1/3 to less than 1/10 now. Let's run through numbers of how the Indic faiths have done in what is now the Indian Union. The population first showed an increase in 1951, accounting for mass migration in Punjab and Bengal during partition, to 87% from 84% a decade earlier in 1941. But since then, it has been reducing steadily to stand at 83% as per 2011 census. The debate engendered by BJP leaders is not about the national picture by pockets of demographic change. So let's go region-wise. Because Nishikant Dubey spoke of Santhal Pargana, what's the picture like in there? The Muslim population, which was less than 10% in 1951, now stands at over 22% as per the 2011 census. It could be 25% in 2024. The graphics also tells you that while the minority population was evenly distributed across the state in 1951, the growth has been more pronounced in the Santhal Pargana. Dubey is not wrong. He also said that this geography has seen tribal population go down from 36% in the year 2000, when the state of Jharkhand was carved out of Bihar, to 26% now. This could be because of an element of religious convergence to Christianity, which are more focused on tribal populations in central India. Now let's look at the Purnia pocket of Bihar that abuts Santhal Pargana. From 32 plus percentage in 1951, it's nearly 46% in 2011, which means it might be 48, 49% in the present. Again, in Murshidabad, Malda belt of Bengal, what's the picture like? While in Bengal itself, the minority population has increased from less than 20% post-independence to 27% plus in 2011 and possibly 30% plus now. In Murshidabad, which abuts Bangladesh, the population is more than double at 66%, possibly 70% now. A little nugget. Since 1952, when the first general elections were held in India, Murshidabad constituency has not elected a single non-Muslim candidate ever. Nothing wrong with it. If there's a Muslim majority, it must elect a Muslim candidate. So the secularism argument goes. Okay, so how is it like in the union territory that Dubey imagined? Here we go. Taken together, the 11 districts in Bengal, Bihar and Jharkhand had a Muslim minority population of 30% in 1951, which stood at 45% in 2011. After a decade and more, the number would have easily crossed the halfway mark, making it a Muslim majority union territory electorally if it ever got created. There are a few other pockets of demographic concentration, from western Uttar Pradesh to Assam to Kerala, that can be seen in these graphics. Mewat, for example, in Haryana was about 80% Muslim in 2011. It would obviously be more now in 2024. Similar trends of population concentration along religious lines can be seen in the case of much of the Northeast, where the demography favors the followers of Christianity for historical reasons going back to the colonial times. For example, in Nagaland and Mizoram, the British had tasked or outsourced to the church their education-related responsibilities, resulting in most of the tribes converting to Christianity over decades. Imagine, from being 100% tribal or Hindu till the 1970s, Arunachal Pradesh had become 30% plus Christian by the last census. Similarly, in the Santhal Pargana, the drastic fall in the population of those identifying themselves as tribals between the year 2000 and now could be due to the missionary activity. So that's how the numbers stack up. The likes of Bajaj extrapolate the numbers and believe that irrespective of population measures or development trajectories, these trend lines lead to a situation where by 2070, if not 2060, the followers of Indic faiths, Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, and Buddhism, might be lesser than Muslims and Christians taken together. But let's not get there and stay put in the present. How does it affect politics? I mentioned that nugget earlier that Murshidabad in Bengal has always elected a Muslim MP since independent India's first Lok Sabha elections in 1952. Similarly, in Kishanganj in neighboring Bihar, but for 1967, when Lakhanlal Kapoor of the Praja Socialist Party had won, the Lok Sabha seat has not seen a single non-Muslim MP. Of the 17 Lok Sabha elections, 10 times it has returned a Congress MP, 4 times the seat has been won by the RJD of Lalu Prasad Yadav, once each by the Janata Dal and the PSP, and only once by the BJP, when Shah Nawaz Hussain won it in 1999 and went on to become a minister in the Vajpayee government. It is not happenstance that AIMIM of Asaduddin Owaisi opened its account in North India via Kishanganj, when in last Bihar Assembly elections, the party won 4 of its 5 seats from the district alone. The demography favors Muslim politics. There's a reason why only BJP leaders are vocal and complaining about increasing Muslim pockets. Their Hindutva politics, focusing on Hindu consolidation, means that Muslims are not going to vote for the party. We have seen from the just concluded general elections that despite a soft push through Pasmanda Muslims and a mathematically provable non-discriminatory governance delivery to Muslims, the BJP saw massive polarization against it in the minorities. The Muslim masses across the country perfected the Karnataka model from earlier in the year, voting to vote out the BJP. Sociologically, politically, economically, whichever way you look at these numbers, they raise an issue which we as a nation and society need to engage with. Why do I say so? Remember Sharjeel Imam of the Shaheen Bagh protests? Let's listen to him.
तो हम हिंदुस्तान और नॉर्थ ईस्ट को परमानेंटली कट कर सकते हैं, पर परमानेंटली नहीं तो कम से कम 1 आध महीने के लिए तो कट कर ही सकते हैं। मतलब इतना मवाद डालो पटरियों पर, रोड पे, उनको हटाने में 1 महीना लगे, है कि नहीं? जाए एयरफोर्स से, असम को काटना हमारी जिम्मेदारी है, असम और इंडिया कट के अलग हो जाए।
He was talking about a corridor, a pocket of Muslim concentration that stretches from Uttar Pradesh to Bihar to Bengal and through the Chicken's Neck corridor to Assam. So it's not that national security fears are imaginary. This has already been imagined, albeit in the minds of a lunatic fringe. And India is strong enough, both as a state and as a civilization, to make sure that the centripetal wins over the centrifugal. While the interpretations would be political and ideological, the debate on demographics change is rooted in math, in numbers. And I have made some attempt at differentiating between the two. Hope you liked it. You can of course pick and choose based on your own leanings, but let there be a debate. I will contribute to it with these 2 questions of my own. 1. Why is the BJP shying away from a census? It was to happen in 2021, but got delayed due to the COVID disruption. Granted. But there is no reason now to continue to delay it any further. If need be, make the counting of castes part of it, but get the census done. It would blunt the opposition attack, possibly burst some of their myths. 2. Why is the BJP shying away from NRC, a National Register of Citizens? Surprisingly, the issue did not find mention in its manifesto this election. Taken together, the census and the NRC bring about clarity on a host of development issues for the nation, which need the marshalling of data. You can't have a situation when Google knows more about Indian citizens than the government of India. Both are needed, census and the NRC. It's for the Modi government to bite the bullet. Moving on. Quad foreign ministers met in Tokyo on Monday, July 29, and as happens after every such meet, they came out with a joint statement. I found it interesting for some plain speaking it did on China, without naming, of course. Quad is not a military grouping. It calls itself a regional alliance between India, the United States, Japan, and Australia, aimed at harnessing synergies between the 4 democracies for greater common good of the Indo-Pacific region. Leaders do not tire out to emphasize that it is not against China or aimed at China in any manner. But obviously, China is the elephant in the room. The alliance seeks to counterbalance China's expansionism in its neighborhood, coercion with military means, threat of use of force, misuse of international law to its advantage on trade and technology, and abuse of rule of law to change the global order. China is doing all this. From shredding to pieces all agreements with India in 2020 with its Ladakh aggression, to physically attacking Filipino marine vessels recently, to carrying out intimidatory blockade-level tri-services military exercises against Taiwan, to carrying out aggressive debt-trap diplomacy with weaker developing nations, to its wolf warrior diplomats browbeating governments in world capitals. China presents a rare instance in world history of a rising power trying to refashion global geopolitics, rewriting rules, or seeking to do so in isolation. The rise of the United States post-World War II was on the back of an alliance of Western nations, all of which qualified as open democracies. In the case of China, as internally within its own society, so externally, the accent is on threat, use of force, and intimidation. Before I get to the specifics on the joint statement to inform you how Quad is increasingly shedding its China shyness, let me get you instances from last couple of months where China has been in blatant breach of basic international etiquette, if nothing else. On June 17, Chinese Coast Guard ships chased, interjected, and rammed into a Filipino supply vessel. Following a physical fight with the Philippines personnel on board in which one soldier was injured, the Chinese seized all weapons and confiscated the vessel itself. The violent standoff happened near the second Thomas Shoal, a feature both Philippines and China lay claim to. Now imagine, The shoal is 200 kilometers from the nearest Filipino coastline and 1,000 kilometers from the southernmost tip of China in the Hainan Islands. This was not the first time. Chinese naval ships and private militias have been flexing their muscle and intimidating Philippines regularly in violation of an international arbitral award that acknowledged Filipino claims over the disputed territory. Philippines calls the part of South China Sea that lies within its exclusive economic zone as the West Philippine Sea. The South China Sea is claimed by both China and Taiwan as their own in its entirety. The Scarborough Shoal is claimed by both China and Taiwan, as also in parts by Philippines. The Spratly Islands are claimed by China, Taiwan, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Philippines. Amid all these claims and counterclaims, China alone flexes its military muscle to impose its ideas of ownership. And belligerence has increased over the last few years. Not difficult to fathom why. 25% or 1/4 of the world's goods trade and an additional 1/4 of total oil trade passes through the Malacca Strait in 100,000 ships annually. All this goes to the South China Sea, which accounts for 60% of all maritime trade globally. Naturally, it's a choke point. China wants to control it, and the world won't let it. That's where Quad comes in. I covered the first two in-person Quad leaders summits in Washington, D.C. and Tokyo in 2021 and 2022, respectively. In both, during background briefings and public statements, leaders and diplomats were careful not to center stage China. Questions asked by media persons were either deflected or couched in diplomatese to take all the sting out. Also, while the DC summit had a strong overhang of COVID, the Tokyo one happened within a month of Russia starting its Ukraine war and so took all attention. China remained a shadow. The third Leaders Summit happened in Hiroshima last year. The fourth is to be hosted by New Delhi later this year, but is facing some scheduling issues given lame duck nature of the Biden presidency. Comparing the joint statements between Hiroshima Leaders Summit and the Tokyo Foreign Ministers Meet gives a clear indication of Quad turning into a great wall against China, as one newspaper called it. As I run the graphics, here are some points. While the Hiroshima statement had the standard one-liner on free and open Indo-Pacific, the Tokyo one extended it to one full para, emphasizing principles of rule of law and prohibition on the threat of use of force to settle disputes. While both statements emphasize that no country should dominate and no country should be dominated, the one from Tokyo this week also goes on to add that countries should take measures to avoid any miscalculation and misunderstanding. Sources told me both the above changes are aimed at China's increased threats to Taiwan with the use of blockade-grade military exercises. The para on South China Sea situation for the first time mentioned the 2016 UN Arbitral Award, which acknowledged Philippines' claims over the disputed territory. India has endorsed it only second time, after reflecting its position in a joint statement with the Philippines last year. The Tokyo Foreign Minister's statement adds a new para on launch of a Quad maritime legal dialogue, which I am told will create a mechanism to uphold United Nations Convention on the Laws of the Seas, the UNCLOS, among the Indo-Pacific nations, essentially creating one more pressure point for China to tackle. While the Hiroshima statement initiated focus on undersea cables, a critical infrastructure for modern communications and commerce, Tokyo statement goes further and talks of securing these cable networks through trusted vendors, emphasis being on those whom you trust. Clearly, nobody trusts China in the present. Apart from this, there was a boost for India's positions this time. In a first, the Quad named Pakistan-based terror organizations, Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. All earlier statements only talked of international terror organizations under the UNSC 1267 Sanctions Committee. Also, the statement this time targets proliferation of nuclear weapons to North Korea. We know it is Pakistan that has facilitated Korea's pursuit of nuclear technology from the time of Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-il, courtesy the Abdul Qadir Khan's private nuclear proliferation network. India also got to mention a spread of new terrorism menace using drones, UAVs as also tunnels that are increasingly being used by Pakistan to smuggle drugs and weapons across the border into India. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar said that Quad is not a talking shop. He also said that growth and prosperity require security and stability. The addition of security as a consideration in Quad deliberations was subtle, a word I personally found diplomats shy of using earlier. In fact, in all background briefings, it would be emphasized that Quad is not a security grouping. Jaishankar also said that Quad is here to stay, here to do. This clear-headedness is welcome. China should start expecting more of this from Quad going forward. Thanks for watching.